surgeon's apprentice. You don't want to be a surgeon's apprentice in the early 19th century, let me tell you. This is a day of, I'm afraid, rather primitive medical practice in which your main job would be as a surgeon's apprentice, holding people down who were having arms and legs hacked off without benefit of anesthesia or darn little anesthesia. So if you have the idea that these poets are people who lived in ivory towers and had sort of easy, greasy lives that allowed them to think about all these noble and high things that you don't have time to think about because your life is so hard, forget about it. Keats, in fact, lived a life that most of us could not have stood for one day. He knew exactly what it meant to see patient after patient rolled in on the table and stand there and have to help while the goriest and most horrible things were taking place. He also knew what it was to nurse his brother Tom through his illness and see him die and wither and waste away from tuberculosis. He was a man acquainted with grief in just about every conceivable way. But the spirit of intensity and joy and sort of vitality in John Keats was not to be quenched. And although his life was very short, he died when he was just a bit more than 25 years of age of the terrible disease of his family, tuberculosis, in that short period. And we have to remember what a remarkable thing this is. If Shakespeare had died at 25, he would be a minor poet. If Milton had died at 25, he would be a poet of the second rank at least, certainly not of the first rank. If Wordsworth had died at 25, he would not be a major figure in English literature. And in fact, I can't think of anybody whatsoever in the entire history of English or American literature who would loom as a major figure if they died that young. And yet, he dies at 25 years of age. Keats was, it meant everything to him. I think in particular by Greek mythology. It meant everything to him. I think in part, Greek mythology was to him what other forms of mythology were to earlier romantic poets. You remember in our early study of romanticism, when we were looking at the pre-romantic poets, that Thomas Gray goes back to Norse mythology, try to find a kind of inspiration. Macpherson goes to Irish and Scottish mythology, Gaelic mythology, in order to find inspiration. Thomas Chatterton goes back to the Middle Ages to find inspiration. Cooper says in his address to the Yardley Oak that he would almost be willing to be one of those druids of the past so that he could see the tree in the sort of holy way that the ancient druids did. Well, for Keats, returning not to neoclassical views of the classical past, but to the actual, for him, romantically intense Greek reality of those mythologies was a source of inspiration as well.